Alright guys, I'm gonna cut straight to the chase. This video is over 30 minutes, but I think it's really worth it. Here's my scratch-built bus. So this is a bus that I have. It's the only bus I have, and it's not the one that I'm gonna use. I am gonna make a bus from scratch, and what that means is I'm not starting with a car. I'm not starting with a die-cast model, which is what you've already seen me do. I'm starting with this, and this is a printout of a bus. What I did was I grabbed a picture from Google image search of a bus that looked makeable, and I scaled it down to 1/64th scale and printed it out. So now I have all these dimensions here, and this one actually, I'll write it there for you, in millimeters of what I'm going to use. 37.5 for the length from the back of the bus to that wheel there. And we'll just verify that it's 37.5 millimeters. And it is. So we know we're good to go. And the material that I'm going to be using for the bulk of the bus is this polystyrene plate, it's called here. I got this from the dollar store here in Japan. I have 0.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter thickness. For the build, I'm going to go ahead and use this 0.5 millimeter. It's a little bit more flexible. The outer shell doesn't need to be that thick, and this 1 millimeter stuff is just a little bit too hard to cut, and I find that it's better to use the thin stuff. So the styrene usually has a glossy side and a matte side. I like to keep the matte side facing out. That's just my personal preference. So I'll start here by measuring out the length of the bus, what it needs to be. The good thing about having this printed out right here is that you can lay the material on top of it. You can measure directly what you need. It helps you keep everything the right size within scale. So for the roof, I'm going to build up layers and then round it over, so I don't actually want to include that height in my initial rectangle. So I have a measurement here from the top, excluding the roof, to the bottom of the body. And that is the starting rectangle that we will go with. So I'm going to need 2 of those at these measurements. We'll make that one a bit more even at 38. I'm going to need 1 sheet for each side. So I'll go ahead and cut those out. And here we are. That looks about right. Lines up with where it needs to. You can see here I left myself some wiggle room for the front and the rear. I'm not sure exactly how I'm doing that yet. So let's talk wheels. I have this little truck, which is a pullback from the dollar store again. And actually, funnily enough, the body is about the width of the bus I'm making. And I thought for a moment that I could use this body of the truck in some way, but I didn't really like the shape of it. I mean, you could make it work possibly, but we're just going to take the wheels off. And they're a little bit bigger than scale, but that's perfect for what I want. I have this handy stencil that'll get us the exact size we need for the tire's wheel well. Trace that onto some styrene. Oh no, it's not coming out easily. Now, one of the good things about styrene is you can score it and then pop it out. But if it doesn't, here's a little trick you can use. I'm going to cut down the center of this half circle, which allows me to pop out each side by itself. And we have the perfect shape for our wheel well. Now we just need to do 3 more. And I'll go ahead and transfer those from one side to the other. Make sure everything's lined up. And actually, for this, a knife is a bit unwieldy in this curve. I like to use a sharp awl, since we just need to score the surface. We don't need to cut it. And you can just see from the back, there's an indentation where we need to break that line. We'll sand that smooth. It's a little trick with some sandpaper wrapped around a round handle, approximately the size of the hole we need. That'll give us a nice curvature. So I went ahead and cut out some windows, give detail to these panels. They're not exact to the image. I'm not really worried about matching exactly. I just want everything to be in scale, so we get the main idea. And these got a bit flimsy after cutting out so many holes, so I'm going to put a backer on there of this second sheet of styrene. And I chose to put the glossy side facing out, just in case I thought to keep the windows. I thought it might look more like glass if it's less matte. So I'm just going around the edges here with the Tamiya extra thin plastic cement. And now I have 2 nice sides of the bus. Next I'll need to think of how to put these together. So something just popped into my head. I have this 3mm U-shaped channel, and it says that the inside width is 1mm, which is 2 times the thickness of these sheets I'm using, which means we'll have a perfect fit to make a bottom trim and a top trim to these side panels. Starting to look nice. Alright, I'm going to start to work on the front here. And I wanted to build this up in layers, trying to think about the depth of each thing on the front of the car. And here's the finished result of me layering some things up. I sandwiched some mesh in there for the grill, and I gave it a slight bend to add some more character to the front of the bus there. So I went ahead and put some side pieces on here. I added some windshield wipers, and I went ahead and added some side pieces to this. Some trim on top of the window, and I also reinforced the inside, the back here. I think it'll make it easier to glue everything together later. Do you know an added bonus of this and leaving the trim long on top is that this can slot directly in line with the side panels. Look at this. Ah, I love it when things work out this way. Sanding down those hard corners, the windshield. Fitting the two sides together there. I didn't initially attach the bottom trim to the front. I wasn't exactly sure still what I was going to do. So I'll go ahead and glue those on now. Finish up the top of that windshield. And let's talk bits. So a while ago, I ordered a lot on an auction website of these military models, and they've just been a really great source of kit bits. I think I got 11 models for about 30 bucks. They're really old, and but they were all unassembled. And I pulled out these two from my collection and had a look through. I was able to find some really good stuff. If you look at this, I mean, does it get any better than this kind of match? It just, to me, that just looks exactly the same as what I need. And even better from the other kit. These bits I'm thinking about using as taillights. Not only do they fit perfectly around the edges of this other piece, when you line all three of these up, they're the exact width of the back of my bus. This stuff shocks me every single time, but this happens so often. Look at that. It's just perfect. Meant to be, so we glued them on. And I cut out a back window. Add some more detailing on there. And I did the same technique of gluing the glossy side out for the back window. Cut off the excess, and it can become its own trim piece on top. Flip it around to the matte side and glue it on. Alright, now, I'm mocking this up for the first time, and I noticed that this is a bit wonky. The front and the rear are different sizes. You can see it's a bit tapered towards the back, but I solved that by gluing the sides to the outside of the rear piece. And here it is, all put together. Well, the four sides anyways. We still don't have a roof, and we still don't have a chassis. But it's all starting to come together. Now, I was thinking about the roof, and I think it might be better than a solid roof to have some kind of machine texture welded on. And I had this digger, and I have this steamroller toy. Maybe that would look cool in the front instead of a ram. Take apart this tank. I have an idea that this might fit really well as part of the roof. And it does. But I don't end up using it. And actually, the tank build that I did, I used the treads from this gray tank, and this one just worked so well with the width of the bus and the style of what I was going for that I had to throw it on there. We could put it on the front, or we could put it on the back, and I'm gonna go with the back. I'll have to file down the sides of this on the bottom a bit to make it fit a bit more flush, but I mean, it's just perfect. And we'll need to cover up this hole where the turret was attached before. I think I'm gonna go with something round. I have a fake 1 yen coin here. It actually has one of my friend's kids' names on it. And we'll need to cover up that 1 yen denomination with another circle of styrene. Let's get rid of that name. And we'll glue down our styrene. There we go. It's a bit tall. I'll sand it down. Make it sit a bit lower on top. And we need a little access latch handle there. So actually the day before I was starting to do this, I watched a video by RP Archive, which is a really great D&D tabletop gaming terrain builder on YouTube. I'll put a link to his video that I found this hint in. He talked about making a pitted metal texture with styrene sheet and putting some plastic cement on and then stippling with a really hard brush. So that's what I'm doing right now. I have this really stiff brush, put on a generous amount of this plastic cement, and just as I stipple, those bristles are putting little dimples into the surface. And I did this on almost all of the flat armor panels that I put on the bus, and it just came out. It's subtle, but it came out really well, I think. It takes the paint and dry brushing and washes just up that much more. So let's get this tank welded on here. And you didn't think I was gonna go away without baking soda. So I don't really trust this heavy metal die-cast tank on top of styrene with super glue alone. I'm gonna scoop some baking soda into here and make a really strong joint. And as always, I'll scoop some baking soda in there, saturate it with super glue, and I will repeat. You can build up really as much as you want to with layers of baking soda and super glue. It sands really well as well. I'm not going to sand, obviously. It's on the inside. It doesn't need to be pretty. So things are starting to get a bit messy. Let's clean that up. That's better. And here we are. I started on the roof. This is 3 layers of 1 millimeter thick styrene sheet, and I staggered them a bit because I'm planning on sanding them down to get a curve. This sanding process was really messy, and in the end I couldn't get it perfectly smooth, so I put a very thin sheet of styrene over top. And the front there was a bit troublesome. I had to use a heat gun and kind of pull the front down. There were some compound angles going on that a sheet of plastic does not like to meet. But I'm really proud of this. This is not something easy to make. So let's get this thing glued on. And there is the roof. Almost completed. I added a bit more detail and texture on there. Some kids' blocks and a wooden door from another military kit. I also added a chassis, well, the beginnings of a chassis. I added some rails and supports at the height that I wanted the wheels to be. So you can see they're almost where they need to be. I haven't made any axles yet. And the side trim here, just lining it up with that body panel in the front. And the good thing about styrene glue is you have a lot of time to move things around while it's still sticky but not stuck. So I'll just work that down, making sure it's nice and straight. Making some more detail panels here. Screwdriver handle hole. Random round details. The small details on these kinds of builds are really what sells it at scale. So add little bits and holes and cuts wherever you can. Okay, well, I've been working on this bus for a couple days now, and I did something that I probably shouldn't have done. I went to the dollar store and look what I found. This bus for $1. It's basically at scale too. Get out of here. We're not going to use that. We're going to use our bus. I'm going to continue with the details. Put some running lights on there. And here I'm going to make some mirrors for the front of the bus. The reference image I was using, the schematic, had two mirrors. The one on the right side coming from above, and the one on the left side coming from where the bottom of the window would be. I followed them, I would say, mostly, but I made it work for what I was doing and the materials I had. I think they came out alright. They're not perfect, but I think in the grand scheme of the whole build, they kind of, any inadequacies get lost in all the other details. So that's a good thing about making a complex build. Not every single detail has to be perfect. Everything just has to be cohesive. And I made the second mirror off camera. I think they turned out pretty well. So we're gonna need to take care of the wheel situation. I don't want to glue them. I'm never gonna actually roll this around, but for some reason I can't help but have it rolling. So I'm going to work out a way to keep the axles in one spot while not gluing them on. And this is what I came up with. There's some strips building up the height a bit, and then two triangle pieces to hold the axle in place. And I needed the wheels to be a bit closer in than they could normally be, so I had to cut off a bit of the wheel here. And the axles are 2mm round stock of styrene, and they're just press fit. Rolling nice. So this next part is the entire process of me building the front ram for the bus. And I wanted to include the whole process because I think that people might get something out of seeing the whole thing come together from start to finish. The larger pieces here are 2mm square stock, and the smaller is 1mm square stock. I got the general inspiration for this from a picture I saw on Instagram, also the other day, probably yesterday. And the image that I saw included some chain wrapped around. I pulled out some smaller scale chain that I have, and I didn't really like the way it was looking, so I didn't go with it in the end. But you'll be able to see what I come up with here. The general shape is that there's two large bars going across and then wrapping around kind of at a, what is that, 30-degree angle, 40-ish degree angle to the sides, and then there's the second bar is held up by those smaller bars. And I wanted to let the smaller bars poke out the top. I think spikier is better than everything being square. I don't really like everything lining up square for details like this. And here it is, stuck on the bus. I used some H-bar stock here, and I took a knife and whittled the ends to a point. And I ended up gluing that on the bottom. I had to build up an area to glue that onto. And here I'm making some wheel armor for the rear wheels, because you don't want your entire wheel exposed. You can get shot and stabbed and who knows what crashed into. So I'll put that on the back with some rivets. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen this rivet technique before. And here's the second one, and the way that I damaged up the bottom of it there. First with a knife, then with some files. And we'll stick that one on too. And we'll rough it all up with a file. Give it some battle damage. So for the windows, I ended up deciding to just screen them all off. And I'm going to use my sanding mesh. And I found this other piece. I think this is from a pullback motor or something, but we'll stick that on as a big armored door. And fast forward a bit, I got a lot of detail done. Here's some corrugated paper mimicking sheet metal. I put some gem stickers on the front for headlights. I built an exhaust. I used that bit from the earlier digger to create some more detail on the bottom. And fast forward a bit more, and we have lots of detail. So I used a pin vise to put some bullet holes in. Put a cage around the front tire there, some gnarly looking saw blades on the side, some battle damage here and there, little star emblem in the back. I fleshed out the exhaust a bit more underneath because it was visible from the side. And you can barely see it, but I used some super glue and baking soda to build up some really caked on welds and rust to show that that tank has just been stuck on as best they could. Got a little gun barrel sticking out of this door now. Something that'll look familiar to people who have seen my truck is this style of wheel armor on the other side here. I put some scratches and damage in the windshield. I don't know if those are going to hang around after priming, because I use a surfacer primer, but I'm planning on doing a dusty windshield anyways, so I don't really mind if they disappear. And now we're on to rivets. So I'm planning on using 3 types of rivets. I have a square 1mm stock, a round 1mm stock that I'll slice, and I have this 0.25mm thin sheet that I will slice up, which is what I usually use for rivets. And now buckle up for some riveting content. Alright, and we'll start on the roof here. I want to get these bands all riveted across, and we will do that. And look, we're all done. That was quick. Good thing we have that fast forward button. And next I'll do this porthole here. If only it was really that quick. So I did some rivets here on the front wheel armor and the belts of metal holding that corrugated metal down. And one of the last things I decided to do was cover up the bottom of this a bit more. And it was time to prime. I love how everything comes together with a coat of primer. So let's take a look back at what we started with. Oh right, we started with this too. And this is what we ended up getting. I really love how it came out. I didn't get to document the painting, but if I did, I feel like this video would have been over an hour. So I will have to make a video focused on painting in the future. And weathering, of course. Just a few comments though. The weathering on the windshield is done with those pastels that I've used before. And a lot of the washes and paints that I use for weathering are just from the dollar store, nothing fancy. And I think really anyone can do it, so I'd like to make a video about that in the future. Again, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next build.